Welcome to VidZed. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. Last week I talked about how Kathy Griffin revealed how the hard left, the Antifa, and all of those protesters are really psychotic and what the nature of their psychosis is. So many of you wrote back and said, okay, how do we talk to someone who is on the hard left? And part of the problem with this is very simple. A psychosis is largely untreatable. People who have gone all the way down that road, including one of my very good friends for many years that I worked with in the operating room, just refuse to talk with him. This guy, he's nobody's dummy. He's a smart surgeon. He was a heart surgeon. And we had lots of good conversations. But the fact is that when I ask him to present evidence on something, all he does is scream. And so, you can't talk to people who are completely psychotic. It doesn't work. And it's probably incurable once they've gone that far. All that happens is that you end up with them saying you're a racist or a misogynist or a homophobe or that you've committed a microaggression. They just throw these words at you without regard for facts. You can't get through. We talked about the bubble. So the question then is there a kind of palliative therapy that can be done which may help people who haven't been totally lost down that road? And before we get there, let us remember there is one saying that really is very solid about this. A conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. Now, a lot of people think about that as having been mugged in a literal sense. Somebody strangled them, whatever else. But there's another way to get mugged. You can get mugged by reality. And here's how we start with it. Now, we know that most of the Antifa protesters are paid protesters. And most of the money is coming from George Soros. Now, there isn't a fine you can give George Soros big enough to hurt him. The guy is a mega billionaire. He's one of the 50 richest people, or maybe 10 richest people in the world. So, you can't put enough zeros after the fine and have it be legal and have it make any difference to him. But if we take a look at the fact that through his Open Society Foundation, he's funding organization after organization after organization that are beating people up and breaking things and burning things, and then they do it again, and they do it again, and he funds them again and again and again. This means he is a conspirator to commit these various kinds of mayhem. There's all kinds of illegality involved here. And because it's happening across state lines, this is a federal case. It's not just a state case. Now, for example, in California, it would be possible for them to charge him with conspiracy to commit property damage, to commit assault and whatnot with regard to Berkeley. But if he lives in New York and this happened there, it's federal. And as we look at it, there's another set of crimes. It's called suborning to commit those crimes. And the term suborning literally means inducing someone to commit an illegal act. That is, I'm going to pay them. I'll take them there. I'll put them up. I'm going to give them $1,500 for a day's work. And if they beat people up, more power to them. You suborned the illegal act. So now if you are able to take him up on charges, those charges carry jail time. That would affect him. And that would be one thing that we could do. But, and it's 42 U.S. Code Section 1985, 18 U.S. Code Section 241. And remember the guy who used a bicycle lock on a chain and swung it and hit a guy in the face, hurt him badly. Well, if this is an attempt to kill under 18 U.S. Code Section 241, that is a 10-year sentence. And what we would be doing in something like this is loosely known as cutting off the head of the snake. And if you do that, and there is no money to pay for the violent protesters, a lot of them will go away. Now they have to figure out they're going to do to get money to live on. Now, the second part of this is students. Now, in case you're really remembering some of the things I've talked about, what we're talking about here is the law of subsidy. George Soros is subsidizing these violent protests. And what happens when you subsidize things? You get more of them, and they get more expensive. And in the case of the protests, they get more violent and more expensive that way in terms of physical and personal harm. Now let's talk about students. And in the protest world, I'm using the term very loosely. The term student there simply means someone who is enrolled in school. And the problem here is that the federal government provides Pell Grants and it provides federally insured student loans for various courses of study that do not prepare people for life. We used to talk about them as basket weaving courses so that you could get your football team together. Now we'll have something about the history of the sexual practices of some tribe in Africa as applied to the founding fathers of the United States. Well, there's no connection, but some university figured out how to create the course. I mean, we can run down the list. I have a whole bunch of these that are listed. They're just insane. And all you have to do is Google the 10 craziest courses that are taught in colleges, or you wouldn't believe these 10 courses and so on. You'll come up with a long list of things that are just beyond the belief. None of these courses have anything to do with any life skill. They have nothing to do with anything that's an employment skill. But what they do is they provide a way to get a student to come to the college to subsidize the college. Remember, we've talked about this before, the law of subsidy. When you subsidize education, you get more education, it gets more expensive, and you're not subsidizing students. But now you have students who have a situation that as long as they're a student, they never have to pay anything back. So they stay in school with these stupid courses, and the schools that bend over backwards to let them stay on are doing it because the school benefits financially, not because the student has any benefit. Not happening. Well, these people are taking courses that have no value, and they're not forced to do any real academic work. They're not forced to be responsible for their lives. So if you have to be responsible, you can't afford to destroy your life. These people don't have to be responsible, and so they are destroying their lives. If you have a student who's in a challenging class in one of what are called the STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and that guy's out working to support himself, he can't afford BS like Antifa. But Pell Grants and FISLs create these permanent students. So how do you fix them? You eliminate the subsidy for worthless studies. And it's real easy. We could do it tomorrow in the Department of Education. Betsy DeVos could work out where you simply say, if we have a course of study or a college, either one or both, where 40% of the students are in default on their student loans, we will not give any more student loans for that program or for that college. All of a sudden, the only programs that would get student loans or Pell Grants would be good ones. It would take no time at all for this to happen. I mean, literally, you make the announcement and a whole bunch of classwork is just going to disappear from the bulletin. Now let's look at one other thing. Remember, a lot of these protesters are also on welfare, and they get paid by Soros. So if we cut off Soros, that's one thing. What about welfare? Welfare people have lots of time off. If you're working, you don't have time to go get involved in these protests and hurt people. You're too busy earning a living. So what we would do is do what we've already learned works. And the state of Alabama said, we're going to impose a work requirement. If you are on food stamps, you have to go to work. You don't have to work enough to get yourself out of poverty, but there are certain work requirements. 85%, look at this again, 85% of the people on food stamps suddenly got off of food stamps when they had to work. Can you imagine what that would do to the federal budget? As long as there's a work requirement, all of a sudden welfare goes down. Now you got fewer people with money and time to go into these worthless and hazardous, dangerous activities. Over the country, this is consistent. Maine set up a work requirement for food stamps. Within 3 months, 3 months, they had an 80% drop in food stamps. That's virtually instant. I wish I knew of a medicine that was that effective for a disease. That's rare. Now, under Clinton, remember, the Republican Congress forced President Clinton, after he vetoed it twice, to accept welfare reform that had a work requirement. It's still the law. Within a very short period of time, a lot of people got off of welfare. What did President Obama do? President Obama said, oh no, it's cruel to make you work. And so he quit enforcing the work requirement. What happens? We have more people on welfare. You've got to get rid of that problem. You establish a work requirement. All of a sudden, the class on the dole goes way, way down. Now, here's the key. Let's take it in one takeaway. We have to stop subsidizing idleness. Remember, the law of subsidy says when you subsidize something, you get more of it and it gets more expensive. That's it. It's universal. And what we have done with food stamps, with welfare, with George Soros stuff, with Pell Grants, with federal insured student loans, may not be their intention. But with all of those things, we have started subsidizing idleness. So what did we get? We got more idleness and it got more expensive. We can't afford it. The country can't afford it. It has to stop. The cost of it is horrendous. And all we have to do is put a work requirement out there. Will it make it so you can talk to your neighbor who's a lefty? Probably not. But a lot of those people who are suddenly mugged by reality will discover that the things that you tried to talk to them about before are real. And once they learn that they have to do something to provide for their own life, they have to be responsible, they discover that responsibility is a good thing. They discover that evidence is a good thing. Suddenly, they're able to talk about subjects in a way that's actually constructive. Will it fix them all? Remember, true psychosis is probably not treatable, and some of the far left is truly psychotic. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. Thanks for watching.